You think being home alone is safe, until the bedroom door opens by itself and footsteps start pacing upstairs when no one is home. Tonight, I'll tell you two terrifying stories that prove sometimes you're never really alone. I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, in a quiet neighborhood just outside the old historic district, where the preserved 1800s buildings still sat like relics of a frontier long gone. My parents loved the area because it felt peaceful and safe, but as a kid, I always felt a strange unease, especially during the winter when the cold turned the world outside into a dead, muted wasteland. At 15, I was the kind of teenager who preferred staying home, playing games, rather than going out with friends. My parents worked late shifts at Poudre Valley Hospital, so there were nights I'd be home alone for hours, something I didn't mind until the night the bedroom door started opening on its own. It happened in early December of 2014, right after a heavy snowstorm rolled across the Front Range. Fort Collins had been freezing that week, minus temperatures, power flickers, and the kind of wind that screamed against the house at night. When you're alone, the winter silence feels like it has weight. That night, my parents left around 5 p.m. My mom kissed me on the forehead, told me to heat up leftover lasagna for dinner, and reminded me to keep the doors locked. My dad glanced at the windows to make sure they were sealed tight, as if preparing the house for a siege. Before leaving, he told me something weird. The house feels drafty today. If you hear any banging, it's just the wind. He said it so casually that I almost believed it, but deep down, something about it struck me wrong. Our house never made noises like that. And I'd lived there my whole life. By 7 p.m., I was upstairs in my room, gaming with my headphones on. The house was dark, except for the glow of the screen. Outside, the wind scraped against the siding. At some point during my match, I heard a faint creak behind me, muffled through the noise-canceling headphones. I pulled one ear cup off and glanced over my shoulder. The bedroom door, which I always kept shut, was open about 2 inches. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I didn't close it fully. Maybe the heater kicked on and created pressure. I got up, shut the door firmly, and went back to my game. 10 minutes later, it creaked open again. Same angle, same slow movement. I stood up, annoyed, deciding this time I'd slam it shut. I closed it harder than necessary and tugged on the doorknob to make sure it latched. Satisfied, I returned to my chair. 5 minutes later, the door creaked open once more. The sound wasn't subtle this time. It wasn't the sound of a door drifting open under its own weight. It was the sound of a handle being turned. A deliberate movement. I froze, staring at the dark slit of hallway through the gap. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. The hallway light was off, so I saw only a narrow stripe of black. I felt my pulse in my throat. I got up and approached the door slowly, listening for any footsteps. Nothing. Just the low hum of the heater vent in the hallway. I shut the door again and, to reassure myself, I searched for a logical explanation. Houses shift in cold weather. Wooden frames expand. Old hinges squeak. But our house wasn't old. It was built in 1998, and none of my friends' houses behaved like this. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to my imagination, getting the best of me because I was home alone during a storm. But I couldn't shake one detail. The sound I'd heard wasn't just the door opening. It was the click of the latch, like someone on the outside had turned it. I sat back down at my desk and tried to resume my game. But the silence of the hallway pressed in, heavy, and expectant. I took a deep breath, put my headphones on. The door creaked open again. This time, I didn't turn around immediately. I sat completely still, staring at the edge of my monitor, pretending I hadn't heard anything. It felt like something was standing behind me, watching me, waiting for me to react. I turned around, slowly. The door was now open 6 inches. In the darkness beyond, I saw what looked like a shadow, tall, narrow, shift backward, like someone stepping away. I lurched to my feet, ripping the headphones off. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. There was no answer. My breathing quickened, and I could feel my knees starting to tremble. I needed to check the hallway, but part of me was terrified of what I might find. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness as I leaned around the doorframe. The hallway was empty, completely empty, but the air felt wrong, colder than it should have been, like someone had opened a window. I checked each room upstairs, my parents' bedroom, the guest room, the bathroom, all empty, all quiet, nothing disturbed. I returned to my room, closed the door again, and stood there with my hand on the knob. I considered calling my dad, but I didn't want him thinking I was scared of being home alone. I wanted him to trust me. I told myself I would ignore whatever was happening, pretend it wasn't real, pretend everything made sense. For a while, it worked. The door stayed shut. The house stayed quiet. I almost believed I'd imagined the earlier movements. Then, at exactly 8:42 p.m., I know the time because I glanced at the clock on my monitor. The door didn't just open a little, it flung open, hard. The impact of the doorknob hitting the wall echoed through the hallway. I jumped up so fast my chair toppled over. "Who's there?" I yelled again, louder. The hall was still empty, but not silent. I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, moving away from me, down the staircase. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped into the hall, shining my flashlight downward. The staircase creaked, as if someone invisible was walking down. One step, pause, another step, but nothing was there. No figure, no shadow, nothing visible at all. My throat tightened. I whispered, "Dad," but I already knew he wasn't here. I backed into my room and quietly closed the door without letting it latch fully, in case I needed to open it fast. My hands shook as I dialed my mom. She didn't pick up. I tried my dad, straight to voicemail. I felt utterly alone in that house, surrounded by darkness and silence and a cold draft that shouldn't have existed. I kept the flashlight in one hand and a screwdriver from my desk drawer in the other, just in case. Minutes passed. The house was too still, too quiet. Then something new happened. Something worse. My bedroom door, which I hadn't latched, began to push inward slowly, inch by inch, as though someone were nudging it with a single finger. I stared at the widening gap, feeling my breath catch in my chest. Behind the door, in the darkness of the hallway, I saw the faint outline of a head tall, higher than my dad's height, leaning slightly, as if peering into my room. I dropped the screwdriver. For the first time in my life, I felt real, primal fear, the kind of fear that empties your lungs and freezes your body. Then, the head shape withdrew. The door closed, softly, carefully, as if whoever was out there didn't want to scare me too badly. Yet, I stood frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute. I didn't move until my phone buzzed with a text from my dad. "Everything okay?" I stared at the message, tears stinging my eyes. I typed back with trembling fingers, "Someone's in the house." He called immediately. I answered in a whisper, afraid to make noise. He told me to go downstairs, leave the house, and wait outside until the police arrived. I didn't want to open the door again, but staying felt worse. I crept into the hallway, flashlight trembling in my hand. The staircase loomed ahead of me, steep and dark. I took the first step, then the second. And that's when I heard it from directly behind me, a whisper, "Don't go." The whisper behind me was so close it felt like warm breath brushing the back of my neck. I spun around with the flashlight raised, expecting needing to see someone standing there, but the hallway was empty. The air was cold enough to sting my skin, and for a split second I wondered if the voice had come from inside my own head. But no, there was intention in that whisper. A warning. Or a threat. I backed down the stairs, gripping the railing, refusing to turn my back fully to the dark second floor. Every step groaned, as if the weight on them wasn't just mine. Halfway down, the upstairs hallway light flickered on by itself. That old incandescent bulb buzzed weakly, casting a sickly yellow glow across the landing. In that moment, I saw clearly that the bedroom doors which I had checked and shut earlier were now open, all of them, open wide like gaping mouths. I bolted down the rest of the stairs, nearly slipping on the last step. When my feet hit the living room carpet, something changed. That freezing draft from upstairs seemed to sweep down after me, washing over my shoulders, following me like a living thing. I felt, watched, no, hunted. I sprinted to the front door, unlocked the deadbolt, and yanked it open. A blast of cold air hit my face as I stumbled onto the porch. The snow outside was nearly knee-high from the storm earlier. I didn't stop to put on shoes. I didn't stop to grab a coat. I ran across the yard in nothing but socks and a hoodie, my feet instantly going numb. I made it to the sidewalk under the orange glow of the street lamp, breathing so hard I thought I might pass out. My phone buzzed again. It was my dad. I answered with shaking hands. "I'm outside," I whispered. "I heard someone. I swear someone's upstairs." "Stay there," he said. "Police are almost there. Don't go back in." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Across the street, a dark figure stood beneath a pine tree, half hidden by branches. For a terrifying second, I thought whoever had been in my house had followed me out. But when a car drove past, the headlights revealed it was just a mailbox shaped like a man. It belonged to our neighbor, Mr. Hensley. My nerves were shot to hell. Every shadow looked alive. Every sound felt wrong. But the real horror hadn't even started yet. When the police arrived, 2 officers from Fort Collins PD, they searched the whole house. Upstairs, downstairs, basement, garage, nothing. No footprints in the snow, except mine. All windows locked from inside, no sign of forced entry. One of the officers, a gruff guy with a thick mustache, asked me repeatedly if I was sure I wasn't dreaming or hearing the wind. I wanted to grab him and shake him, but what could I say? That my door opened itself? That I heard footsteps with no person attached to them? That a whisper told me not to leave? They wouldn't believe me. But one detail bothered them. When they checked the upstairs thermostat, it read 49 degrees, far too cold. The heater was running, but warm air wasn't reaching the second floor, as if something was blocking it or absorbing it. The officers advised me not to stay home alone that night. My parents rushed home an hour later, apologizing again and again for leaving me by myself. My mom hugged me so long I couldn't breathe. My dad walked upstairs and shut every door slowly and firmly, as if performing a ritual to reassert control over the house. That night, I slept downstairs on the couch, lights on, TV playing quietly to fill the silence. For a while, things seemed normal, too normal. I drifted into an uneasy sleep. Then, at 3:17 a.m., I woke to the unmistakable creaking of the upstairs floorboards. Slow, deliberate pacing. My blood turned to ice. The sound moved from one end of the hall to the other. Long strides, heavier than before. A shadow passed by the top of the staircase. I sat up, heart pounding, staring at the dim silhouette gliding across the landing, too tall and too still to be human. It didn't walk so much as drift. My voice was stuck in my throat. Tears welled in my eyes. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a nightmare, anything but real. But then the shadow stopped and turned, facing me. Even though I couldn't see its face, I felt its attention, like a pressure behind my eyes. I curled into the corner of the couch, shaking violently. The shadow remained at the top of the stairs for nearly a minute before receding back down the hallway until it disappeared entirely. I waited hours before waking my parents. They searched again. Nothing. But something had changed. My dad, normally the rational one, looked afraid. Truly afraid. The next day, while my parents were at work, I decided to research whether anything strange had ever happened in our neighborhood. I knew it sounded crazy, but I needed answers. I started by searching for break-ins or home invasions in the Fort Collins Historic District. Nothing close to home. Then I dug deeper, older incidents, local legends, archived news clippings. That's when I found something. A reference to the Fort Collins Phantom, a minor local legend from the early 1900s. According to archive reports in the Fort Collins Weekly Courier, a tall intruder dressed in dark clothing had been sighted inside several homes near College Avenue during a particularly brutal winter in 1903. Residents claimed he would appear silently in doorways, watching people sleep, then vanish without leaving footprints. Police at the time dismissed the sightings as hysteria caused by the cold. But one detail stood out. He was always described as unusually tall and always cold. One entry mentioned that victims often felt a freezing draft in their homes before seeing him. I felt lightheaded reading that. My room had been freezing that night. My hallway had been freezing. The whisper, "Don't go," echoed in my mind. I didn't know whether the legend was real or just a product of old frontier paranoia, but I couldn't deny the similarities. As I scrolled further, I saw one more disturbing note. The last reported sighting of the phantom was in a home on the exact block where my house was later built. Same land, same ground. I slammed the laptop shut. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. My parents scheduled a full HVAC inspection, thinking maybe the cold spots were caused by faulty vents. The technician checked everything. He said the system worked perfectly. But when he tried to inspect the upstairs crawl space, he froze. "Huh," he muttered, shining his flashlight into the opening. "That's weird." My dad asked what he saw. "Looks like someone's been up here," the technician said. "Insulation's disturbed, footprints in the dust." My stomach dropped. My dad's face drained of color. The technician added, "But it's strange, they're long. The stride is too long to be normal." My mom told him to stop talking. She didn't want to hear anymore. That night, we slept together in the living room. No one went upstairs. For days afterward, the house was quiet. Too quiet. As if whatever had been walking around was waiting for something. Or deciding something. On the 5th night, I woke again at exactly 3:17 a.m., the same time as before, to the sound of the upstairs floorboards creaking. But this time, it wasn't pacing. It was approaching the stairs. Slowly, deliberately, step by step. My breath caught in my throat as the tall shadow appeared at the top of the staircase again. But instead of stopping, it began descending, one step, then another. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. It reached the bottom step. The air around me dropped to freezing. The TV flickered, then shut off. The shadow stood only feet away, towering over the couch where I sat frozen. I finally found my voice and whispered, "What do you want?" The shadow leaned forward slightly, not walking, not bending, just tilting like gravity didn't apply to it. And then, in a voice that sounded layered like several whispers overlapping, it said, "You opened the door." My vision blurred. The room spun. I blacked out. When I woke, it was morning. The shadow was gone. My parents were asleep. The heater was running. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The front door was wide open, snow blowing into the entryway, forming a thin line across the floor leading from the porch all the way to the couch where I had passed out. But there were no footprints in the snow. Not mine, not anyone else's, just a long, smooth path, as if something had glided. My parents tried to convince me I sleepwalked, that I opened the door myself. But I knew better, because of one final detail. When I stood and turned toward the staircase, I saw something carved into the wooden banister that hadn't been there the day before. 4 long scratch marks, deep, parallel, too high for me to reach, too high for anyone normal to reach. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the grooves, the cold, the unmistakable intention. My parents asked if I wanted to move. I told them yes. We left that house 3 weeks later. But sometimes, on very cold nights, when the world goes silent, I swear I hear it again. That faint whisper, that warning, that promise. You opened the door, and I know wherever it went, it's still not done with me.
I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, a place where history feels alive, whether you want it to or not. Tourists come for the colonial reenactments, the cobblestone streets, the lantern-lit ghost walks, and the stories about soldiers, spies, and doomed families from the 1700s. But when you live there, those stories start to feel less like entertainment and more like something breathing quietly beneath the surface of everyday life. My mom worked night shifts as a nurse at Riverside Doctors Hospital, so there were evenings when I was left alone in our 2-story house near Jamestown Road. I was 12 in 2009, old enough to stay home for a few hours, but young enough that I still felt uneasy when shadows stretched across the floor at night. The layout of our house was simple: living room downstairs, bedrooms upstairs, and a staircase that sat in the corner of the living room, leading straight up to the dark hallway above. When my mom wasn't home, I avoided looking at that staircase. It always felt like someone was standing at the top, just out of sight. That night I still can't forget my mom left around 8:30 p.m. She gave me a kiss on the cheek and told me to keep the door locked, to call her if anything scared me, and to stay downstairs. She said it casually, but I always wondered why she emphasized that last part. I microwaved mac and cheese, wrapped myself in a blanket, and turned on the TV. The house was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the occasional crack of the wooden frame expanding in the chilly December air. It was one of those nights when the fog from the nearby James River crept into town, muffling every outside sound until the world felt sealed shut. I remember glancing at the digital clock on the cable, Box 10:31 p.m., just a minute after everything changed. It started with a soft thump from upstairs. Not loud, but distinct. I muted the TV and listened. The house settled again, a faint groan from the walls. Then another thump. This time heavier. Directly above me. I stared at the ceiling, heart starting to pound, trying to remember if I had left anything on the floor in my room that could fall. Maybe the cat knocked something over? But we didn't have a cat. We didn't have any pets at all. The third sound removed all doubt. Slow, deliberate footsteps began crossing the upstairs hallway. One step, then another. Then another. As if someone were pacing. I froze on the couch, barely breathing, staring at the staircase that vanished into darkness at the top. The steps continued measured, heavy, too heavy for anyone my age. They reached the far end of the hallway, paused, then began coming back. I grabbed my flip phone with shaking hands and dialed my mom. She answered immediately, probably assuming I was calling because I was scared. But when she heard my voice, she grew serious. "Stay on the line," she said. "I'm calling 911. She told me not to go upstairs, not to speak again, unless it was something urgent." So I sat there, clutching the phone, trembling from head to toe. The footsteps continued for nearly a full minute before stopping altogether. When the police arrived, they entered with flashlights drawn, calling out for possible intruders. I listened from outside, standing in the cold fog with my mom on speakerphone. I heard the officers' boots thumping across the floors above me, their heavy steps echoing like the ones I'd heard earlier, but louder, sharper, more human. They checked every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. When they came back outside, one of the officers crouched to speak to me. He was kind, but he had that tone adults use when they think you imagine something. "Old houses make noise," he said. But ours wasn't old. It was built in 1992, and the sounds I heard weren't random. They were footsteps. My mom came home early that night. She inspected every inch of the house, checking under beds, inside cabinets, and behind shower curtains. I followed her everywhere, refusing to be alone for even a second. Eventually, she convinced me to try sleeping. She tucked me into the downstairs couch and promised to keep all the lights on. I lay awake long after she fell asleep in the recliner beside me. The house was silent, eerily silent. But around 2:40 a.m., I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. A whisper. It floated down from the top of the staircase. Too soft to understand, but not soft enough to ignore. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed it was just the house settling. But then came the footsteps again, slow, heavy, dragging slightly, moving across the upstairs floor with the steady rhythm of a person pacing back and forth. I wanted to scream, but my voice refused to come out. Instead, I lay rigid under the blanket, staring at the edge of the staircase where the faint glow from the living room lamp spilled into the darkness. The steps paused at the top of the stairs, then began descending, one step at a time. The wood groaned faintly with each shift in weight. It sounded exactly like a grown man walking barefoot. I glanced at my mom, asleep in the recliner, completely unaware. I tried to nudge her foot with mine, but I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't look away from the stairs. The footsteps reached the third step, then the second, then the first, and then nothing. No figure, no shadow. The steps simply stopped halfway down and never reached the bottom. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Something about those footsteps felt deliberate. Watching. Testing. The next morning, I begged my mom not to leave me alone that night, but she couldn't miss another shift. She assured me the police found nothing and that the sounds must have come from the heater or the pipes. But I could tell by the way she kept rubbing her arms, the way she kept glancing up the staircase, that she didn't believe her own words. That day at school, I searched online for anything that might explain what I heard. I eventually stumbled across a page describing haunted locations in Williamsburg, most of them places every local kid already knew. The Peyton Randolph House, the Wythe House, the Governor's Palace. But then one short paragraph caught my eye. It wasn't one of the famous spots. It wasn't even a full article. It was just a mention in a list of forgotten ghost stories of Virginia. It said, in the early 1700s, not far from Jamestown Road, settlers once reported the sound of heavy footsteps pacing inside unfinished houses, footsteps that stopped when approached. This was recorded by Reverend Hugh Jones in 1724, though the homes were empty. Locals believed it was the walker, a restless presence lingering from the starving time. I had learned about the starving time in school, the brutal winter of 1609-1610, when Jamestown settlers died in horrific numbers, some resorting to cannibalism. The idea that something from that era was still wandering nearby made my skin crawl. The article didn't go into detail, but it described the walker as tall, silent, and drawn to lonely houses during fog or winter storms. That night was both. I shut the laptop with my hands shaking. My motivation twisted from fear to a kind of desperate curiosity, a need to understand why this was happening, whether it was connected to the land beneath our neighborhood, whether it was connected to me. As sunset approached, the fog rolled in again, thicker than before, swallowing the trees across the street. My mom left at 8:30, like always, but this time she hesitated at the door. "If anything happens," she said softly, "anything at all, call me." I nodded, unable to speak. The house felt different, heavy, expectant, like it knew I was alone again. I wrapped myself in the same blanket, sat on the same couch, and kept every light in the house on. But when 10:30 p.m. approached, I instinctively muted the TV, waiting, listening, and right on time. 10:31 p.m. the footsteps began upstairs. Only this time, they were faster, closer, angrier, and this time, I wasn't sure the thing walking up there even wanted to stay upstairs. Someone was walking upstairs. I didn't sleep at all. Every time I drifted off, my mind replayed the sound of those footsteps, slow, deliberate, weighted like they belonged to someone who knew exactly where they were going. Someone who wasn't surprised to find a stranger renting the house. When the first thin line of morning light broke across the curtains, I finally pushed myself out of bed. I told myself I'd leave early, maybe even get a hotel in Portland. But something made me stop at the base of the staircase again. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe pride. Maybe the stupid need to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. The house was quiet, still, just like it had been the night before, right before everything changed. I crept up the stairs. The air grew colder as I reached the landing, and the cold wasn't random, it had edges. A shape like stepping into someone else's breath. I opened the attic door. The smell hit first. Damp, old timber mixed with something metallic, almost bloody. The floor creaked under my feet, but not like the sounds from last night. Those had been heavier, intentional. I scanned the space with my phone light. Nothing, just boxes. Old fishing gear, 2 rusted lanterns. and a stack of newspapers from the 1940s. The top paper caught my eye. August 13th, 1947. The headline mentioned the Long Island Express. Hurricane, or what locals called the Great New England. Hurricane, even though it technically struck in 38, yet the sub-headline was more interesting. Local boy missing after storm damage revealed hidden cellar. A missing boy. A hidden cellar. I knew the house was old, built long before tourist rentals existed, but the listing had said nothing about a cellar. I lifted more newspapers, flipping through with growing unease. Another headline. Search called off after 5 days. Beneath it, a faded photo. A pale, thin boy, about 12, dark hair combed neatly. Name, Charles Marin. My stomach tightened. I whispered, Charles, testing the name in the air. And the attic answered. A soft creak behind me. I froze. Not the building settling. This creak came in a pattern, one step, then another, just like last night. But now it was inside the attic with me. I spun around. Nothing. But the cold had deepened. My breath fogged. My phone light flickered like something was draining it. I backed toward the door, pulse jackhammering. A low whisper brushed past my right ear, so faint, so broken. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt the intention. Someone wanted me to follow. That instinct that every horror story warns you against? It failed me, because instead of running, I stepped deeper into the attic. And that's when I saw it, barely visible behind a pile of cracked wooden crates. A small, square outline in the floor, dusty but unmistakable. A cellar door. Not the usual kind. This one was child-sized. Built low, almost too small for an adult to crawl through. My throat tightened. The footsteps, the way they paced above me last night, they didn't belong to a full-grown person. I knelt, clearing away debris, revealing an iron ring latch, rusted and stiff. When I pulled, it let out a dry groan that felt too loud in the hushed attic. A cold draft pushed upward immediately, smelling like damp earth and something long sealed away. I shined my light inside. A narrow ladder descended into darkness. The whisper came again, a little clearer this time. A single broken word, down. My entire body recoiled. Every logical thought screamed to leave. But something else, maybe the same thing that drove me to take this solo trip, pushed me forward. Maybe I didn't just come here to be alone. Maybe I came here to confront myself. To stop avoiding the parts of me I buried. The guilt from losing my dad. The anger I never dealt with. Maybe that's why the house chose me. I took a breath and climbed down. The ladder was ice cold under my palms. The cellar walls were dirt, packed tightly, with wooden beams overhead barely holding the structure in place. My phone light revealed small carvings in the dirt lines, tallies, scratches from fingernails. I counted over 60 marks before I forced myself to stop looking. At the far end of the cellar, the dirt dipped inward, forming a shallow depression. In the center lay something wrapped in burlap, the fabric rotted and shredded. I approached slowly, each step heavy with dread. "Please don't be what I think it is," I whispered. I reached down and peeled back a corner of the burlap. Tiny bones. A skull the size of a grapefruit. My vision swam. I stumbled backward, choking on a breath. Charles Marin never made it out of this cellar. But someone, or something, had. Footsteps echoed above me, heavy, pacing, waiting, not childlike at all this time. I scrambled up the ladder, nearly slipping. When I burst into the attic, the door slammed behind me with a force so violent dust exploded from the rafters. The footsteps continued, but now they circled the attic fast, impossibly fast. I stumbled toward the exit, grabbing the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a voice, not a whisper this time, spoke directly behind me. A child's voice layered with something older, deeper, wrong. "You found me." I spun, but no one was there. My phone light died instantly. Darkness pressed in until it felt physical, pushing against my chest, crawling into my ears. And then I heard, breathing right in front of me, slow, wet, hungry. I slammed my shoulder into the door again and again until it burst open. I tumbled onto the landing, sprinting downstairs, nearly falling as I hit the bottom. The entire house vibrated with footsteps now racing overhead, pounding, shaking the beams. Floorboards buckled like something huge was running back and forth. I grabbed my keys, tore open the front door, and didn't stop running until I reached my car. Even as I drove away, I saw movement in the upstairs window. A shape, small, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until I hit Portland. I booked a hotel, locked every door, sat against the wall, and stared at my suitcase like it might move. But the worst part wasn't the footsteps or the voice or the bones. It was the thought that kept looping through my mind like a curse I couldn't shake. Charles died in that cellar. So who or what was walking upstairs?